The Persian Wars, how the Greeks defended Europe against Asiatic invasion and drove the Persians back across the Aegean Sea. The Greeks had learned the art of trading from the Aegeans, who had been the pupils of the Phoenicians. They had founded colonies after the Phoenician pattern. They had even improved upon the Phoenician methods by a more general use of money in dealing with foreign customers. In the 6th century before our era, they had established themselves firmly along the coast of Asia Minor, and they were taking away trade from the Phoenicians at a fast rate. This the Phoenicians of course did not like, but they were not strong enough to risk a war with their Greek competitors. They sat and waited, nor did they wait in vain. In a former chapter, I have told you of a humble tribe of the Persian shepherds had suddenly gone upon the warpath and had conquered the greater part of Western Asia. The Persians were too civilized to plunder their new subjects. They contented themselves with a yearly tribute. When they reached the coast of Asia Minor, they insisted that the Greek colonies of Lydia recognize the Persian kings as their overlords and pay them a stipulated tax. The Greek colonies objected. The Persians insisted. Then the Greek colonies appalled to the home country, and the stage was set for a quarrel. For if the truth be told, the Persian kings regarded the Greek city-states as very dangerous political institutions, and bad examples for all other people who were supposed to be the patient slaves of the mighty Persian kings. Of course, the Greeks enjoyed a certain degree of safety, because their country lay hidden beyond the deep waters of the Aegean. But here their old enemies, the Phoenicians, stepped forward with offers of help and advice to the Persians. If the Persian king would provide the soldiers, the Phoenicians would guarantee to deliver the necessary ships to carry them to Europe. It was the year 492 before the birth of Christ, and Asia made ready to destroy the rising power of Europe. As a final warning, the king of Persia sent messengers to the Greeks, asking for earth and water as a token of their submission. The Greeks promptly threw the messengers into the nearest well, where they would find both earth and water in large abundance, and thereafter, of course, peace was impossible. But the gods of high Olympus watch over their children, and when the Phoenician fleet carrying the Persian troops was near Mount Athos, the storm god blew his cheeks until he almost burst the veins of his brow, and the fleet was destroyed by a terrible hurricane, and the Persians were all drowned. 2 years later they returned. This time they sailed straight across the Aegean Sea and landed near the village of Marathon. As soon as the Athenians heard this, they sent their army of 10,000 men to guard the hills that surrounded the Marathonian plain. At the same time, they dispatched a fast runner to Sparta to ask for help. But Sparta was envious of the fame of the Athens and refused to come to her assistance. The other Greek cities followed her example with the exception of tiny Plateau, which sent 1,000 men. On the 12th of September of the year 490, Miltiades, the Athenian commander, threw his little army against the hordes of the Persians. The Greeks broke through the Persian barrage of arrows, and their spears caused terrible havoc among the disorganized Asiatic troops, who had never been called upon to resist such an enemy. That night the people of Athens watched the sky grow red with the flames of burning ships. Anxiously they waited for news. At last a little cloud of dust appeared upon the road that led to the north. It was P the runner. He stumbled and gasped, for his end was near. Only a few days before had he returned from his errand to Sparta. He had hastened to join Miltiades. That morning he had taken part in the attack, and later he was volunteered to carry the news of victory to his beloved city. The people saw him fall, and they rushed forward to support him. "We have won," he whispered, and then he died a glorious death, which made him envied of all men. As for the Persians, they tried after their defeat to land near Athens, but they found the coast guarded and disappeared, and once more the land of Hellas was at peace. 8 years they waited, and during this time the Greeks were not idle. They knew that a final attack was to be expected, but they did not agree upon the best way to avert the danger. Some people wanted to increase the army. Others said that a strong fleet was necessary for success. The two parties, led by Aristides for the army and Themistocles, the leader of the bigger navy men, fought each other bitterly, and nothing was done until Aristides was exiled. Then Themistocles had his chance, and he built all the ships he could and turned the Piraeus into a strong naval base. In the year 481 BC, a tremendous Persian army appeared in Thessaly, a province of northern Greece. In this hour of danger, Sparta, the great military city of Greece, had elected commander-in-chief. But the Spartans cared little what happened in northern Greece, provided their own country was not invaded. They neglected to fortify the passes that led into Greece. A small detachment of Spartans under Leonidas had been told to guard the narrow road between the high mountains and the sea which connected Thessaly with the southern provinces. Leonidas obeyed his orders. He fought and held the pass with unequaled bravery, but a traitor by the name of Ephialtes, who knew the little byways of malice, guided a regiment of Persians through the hills and made it possible for them to attack Leonidas in the rear. Near the warm wells, the Thermopylae, a terrible battle was fought. When night came, Leonidas and his faithful soldiers lay dead under the corpses of their enemies. But the pass had been lost, and a greater part of Greece fell into the hands of the Persians. They marched upon Athens, threw the garrison from the rocks of the Acropolis, and burned the cities. The people fled to the island of Salamis. All seemed lost. On the 20th of September of the year 480, Themistocles forced the Persian fleet to give battle within the narrow straits which appeared the island of Salamis from the mainland, and within a few hours he destroyed 3/4 of the Persian ships. In this way the victory of Thermopylae came to naught. Xerxes was forced to retire. The next year, so he decreed, would bring a final decision. He took his troops to Thessaly, and there he waited for spring. But this time, the Spartans understood the seriousness of the hour. They left the safe shelter of a wall which they had built across the Isthmus of Corinth, and under the leadership of Pausanias, they marched against Mardonius, the Persian general. The united Greeks, some 100,000 men from a dozen different cities, attacked the 300,000 men of the enemy near Plateau. Once more, the heavy Greek infantry broke through the Persian barrage of arrows. The Persians were defeated as they had been at Marathon, and this time they left for good. By a strange coincidence, the same day that the Greek armies won their victory near Plateau. The Athenian ships destroyed the enemy's fleet near Cape Michal in Asia Minor. Thus did the first encounter between Asia and Europe end. Athens had covered herself with glory, and Sparta had fought bravely and well. If these two cities had been able to come to an agreement, they had been willing to forget their little jealousies, they might have become the leaders of a strong and united Hellas. But alas, they allowed the hour of victory and enthusiasm to slip by, and the same opportunity never returned. Athens versus Sparta. How Athens and Sparta fought a long and disastrous war for the leadership of Greece. Athens and Sparta were both Greek cities, and their people spoke a common language. In every other respect, they were different. Athens rose high from the plain. It was a city exposed to the fresh breezes from the sea, willing to look at the world with the eyes of a happy child. Sparta, on the other hand, was built at the bottom of a deep valley and used the surrounding mountains as a barrier against foreign thought. Athens was a city of busy trade. Sparta was an armed camp where people were soldiers for the sake of being soldiers. The people of Athens loved to sit in the sun and discuss poetry or listen to the wise words of a philosopher. The Spartans, on the other hand, never wrote a single line that was considered literature, but they knew how to fight. They liked to fight, and they sacrificed all human emotions to their ideal of military preparedness. No wonder that these somber Spartans viewed the success of Athens with malice and hate. The energy which the defense of common home had developed in Athens was now used for purposes of more peaceful nature. The Acropolis was rebuilt and made into a marble shrine to the goddess Athena. Pericles, the leader of the Athenian democracy, sent far and wide to find famous sculptors and painters and scientists to make the city more beautiful and the young Athenians more worthy of their home. At the same time, he kept a watchful eye on Sparta, built high walls which connected Athens with the sea, and made her the strongest fortress of the day. An insignificant quarrel between two little Greek cities led to the final conflict. For 30 years, the war between Athens and Sparta continued. It ended in terrible disaster for Athens. During the third year of the war, the plague had entered the city. More than half of the people and Pericles, the great leader, had been killed. The plague was followed by a period of bad and untrustworthy leadership. A brilliant fellow by the name of Alcibiades had gained the favor of popular assembly. He suggested a raid upon the Spartan colony of Sicros in Sicily. An expedition was equipped and everything was ready. But Alcibiades got mixed up in a street brawl and was forced to flee. The general who succeeded him was a bungler. First he lost his ships and then he lost his army, and the few surviving Athenians were thrown in the stone quarries of Sicros, where they died from hunger and thirst. The expedition had killed all the young men of Athens. The city was doomed. After a long siege, the town surrendered in April of the year 404. The high walls were demolished. The navy was taken away by the Spartans. Athens ceased to exist as the center of a great colonial empire which it had conquered during the days of its prosperity. But that wonderful desire to learn and to know and investigate which had distinguished her free citizens during the days of greatness and prosperity did not perish. With the walls and the ships, it continued to live. It became even more brilliant. Athens no longer shaped the destinies of the land of Greece, but now as the home of the first great universe, the city began to influence the minds of intelligent people far beyond the narrow frontiers of Hellas. Alexander the Great. Alexander the Macedonian established a Greek world empire. And what became of this high ambition? When the Achaeans had left their homes along the banks of Danube to look for pastures new, they had spent some time among the mountains of Macedonia. Ever since, the Greeks had maintained certain more or less formal relations with the people of this northern country. The Macedonians, from their side, had kept themselves well informed about the conditions in Greece. Now it happened just when Sparta and Athens had finished their disastrous war for the leadership of Hellas, that Macedonia was ruled by an extraordinarily clever man by the name of Philip. He admired the Greek spirit in letters and art, but he despised the Greek lack of self-control in political affairs. It irritated him to see a perfectly good people waste its men and money upon fruitless quarrels. So he settled the difficulty by making himself the master of all Greece, and then he asked his new subjects to join him on a voyage, which he meant to pay to Persia in return for the visit which Xerxes had paid the Greeks 150 years before. Unfortunately, Philip was murdered before he could start upon this well-prepared expedition. The task of avenging the destruction of Athens was left to Philip's son, Alexander, the beloved pupil of Aristotle, wisest of all Greek teachers. Alexander bade farewell to Europe in the spring of the year 334 BC. 7 years later, he reached India. In the meantime, he had destroyed Phoenicia, the old rival of the Greek merchants. He had conquered Egypt, and he had been worshipped by the people of the Nile valleys as the son and heir of the pharaohs. He had defeated the last Persian king, he had overthrown the Persian Empire, he had given orders to rebuild Babylon. He had led his troops into the heart of the Himalayan mountains, and had made the entire world a Macedonian providence and dependency. Then he stopped and announced even more ambitious plans. The newly formed empire must be brought under the influence of the Greek mind. The people must be taught the Greek language. They must live in cities built after a Greek model. The Alexandrian soldier now turned schoolmaster. The military camps of yesterday became the peaceful centers of a newly imported Greek civilization. Higher and higher did the flood of Greek manners and Greek customs rise, when suddenly Alexander was stricken with a fever and died in the old palace of King Hammurabi of Babylon in the year 323. Then the waters receded, but they left behind the fertile clay of higher civilization, and Alexander, with all his childish ambitions and his silly vanities, had performed a most valuable service. His empire did not long survive him. A number of ambitious generals divided the territory among themselves, but they too remained faithful to the dream of a great world brotherhood of Greek and Asiatic ideas and knowledge. They maintained their independence until the Romans added Western Asia and Egypt to their domains. The strange inheritance of this Hellenistic civilization, part Greek, part Persian, part Egyptian, and part Babylonian, fell to the Roman conquerors. During the following centuries, it got such a firm hold upon the Roman world that we feel its influence in our own lives this very day. A short summary of chapters 1 to 20. Thus far from the top of our high power, we have been looking eastward, but from this time on, the history of Egypt and Mesopotamia is going to grow less interesting, and I must take you to study the western landscape. Before we do this, let us stop a moment and make it clear to ourselves what we have seen. First of all, I showed you prehistoric man, a creature very simple in his habits and very unattractive in his manners. I told you how he was the most defenseless of the many animals that roamed through the early wilderness of the 5 continents, but being possessed of a larger and better brain, he managed to hold his own. Then came the glaciers and many centuries of cold weather, and life on this planet became so difficult that man was obliged to think 3 times as hard as ever before if he wished to survive. Since, however, that wish to survive was and is the mainspring which keeps every living being going full tilt to the last gasp of its breath, the brain of glacial man was set to work in all earnestness. Not only did these hardy people manage to exist through long cold spells, which killed many ferocious animals, but when the earth became warm and comfortable once more, prehistoric man had learned a number of things which gave him such great advantages over his less intelligent neighbors, that the danger of extinction, a very serious one during the first 500,000 years of man's residence upon this planet, became a very remote one. I told you how these earliest ancestors of ours were slowly plodding along, when suddenly, and for reasons that are not well understood, the people who lived in the valley of the Nile rushed ahead and almost overnight created the first center of civilization. Then I showed you Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, which was the second great school of the human race, and I made you a map of the little island bridges of the Aegean Sea, which carried the knowledge and the science of the Old East to the Young West, where lived the Greeks. Next I told you of an Indo-European tribe called the Hellenes, who thousands of years before had left the heart of Asia, and who had in the 11th century before our era pushed their way into the rocky peninsula of Greece, and who since then had been known to us as the Greeks. And I told you the story of the little Greek cities that were really states, where the civilization of old Egypt and Asia was transfigured. That is a big word, but you can figure out what it means. And as something quite new, something that was much nobler and finer than anything that had gone before. When you look at the map, you'll see how by this time civilization has described a semicircle. It begins in Egypt, in the way of Mesopotamia, and the Aegean Islands. It moves westward till it reaches the European continent. The first 4,000 years, Egyptians and Babylonians and Phoenicians and a large number of Semitic tribes. Please remember that the Jews were but one of a large number of Semitic peoples, have carried the torch that was to illuminate the world. They now hand it over to the Indo-Europeans, Greeks, who become the teachers of another Indo-European tribe called the Romans. But meanwhile, the Semites have pushed westward along the northern coast of Africa and have made themselves the rulers of the western half of the Mediterranean, just when the eastern half has become a Greek or Indo-European possession. This, as you shall see in a moment, leads to terrible conflict between the two rival races, and out of her struggle arises the victorious Roman Empire, which is to take the Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Greek civilization to the furthermost corners of the European continent, where it serves as the foundation upon which our modern society is based. I know all this sounds very complicated, but if you get hold of these few principles, the rest of our history will become a great deal simpler. The map will make clear what the world failed to tell, and after this short intermission, we go back to our story and give you an account of the famous war between Carthage and Rome.